Well, guys, what I want to talk about today is kind of building on where Dan was going. Dan took us down 4 very distinct roads for the future. Actually, yeah, I'll take Gabriel's comment. If you guys can, if it's not too hard, mute your microphones when you're not talking. I'll do the same on my end. It'll just make make things a little easier. What I want to talk about a little bit is how the year started. I'd like to start at the beginning of 2020. I don't know if you remember, I went to a concert in the beginning of 2020, and then I traveled on a plane to a different continent. I was supposed to go to a SaaS conference in March, and I don't know if anyone else was on their way to San Francisco in the middle of March, but I definitely was. But more importantly, we started 2020 with plans about how we expected the year to go. And so I kind of want to hear from both of you guys on, given how things had been going coming into 2020, what were you expecting from this year? So can you tell us a little bit about how the past few years at your respective companies had been going briefly, and tell us a little bit about coming into 2020, what were the challenges you guys were facing, and what were you getting ready for? Dusan, why don't you kick it off?
Thank you. So yeah, my year started with a term sheet on a table and pushing for the second. So January was about kind of deciding which term sheet to accept. And then, yeah, February was, a lot of work with lawyers, and then March started. So we all observed the word crashing, and on my end, it was finalizing our investment, which was finalized on March 12th, which was a very interesting week, to say the least. And of course, ever since, it was a really wild ride. So not only is the world changing, but at CleanShave we were able to more than double the team over the past 6 months. Yeah, it was an amazing ride so far. This year is really a long year, so many things packed in. So yeah, that's how my year so far was.
And Alan, why don't you tell us a little bit, paint us a picture.
So I think we came off the back of a really strong year in 2019, really good growth year for Pleo. Just opened a few new countries, a few new markets. We raised our Series B. And yeah, we were in just hyper growth plan. We were scaling our budget significantly. We're scaling our team, our sales operations, our sales organization, our marketing organization. I think everything was just going like, I think Trump said is like the economy has never been better, right, in the beginning of the year. So I think everybody was having huge expectations, right? And I was similarly in the US at the time, and then I kind of fled to Europe, and then I've seen kind of like this dramatic day when everything stopped, and there was like this shock element of what's going to happen, what's next. And I think up until then, I think we had like huge growth plans. I think, and then we had to adapt, right? We had to like learn what the situation is going to bring us. We had to think about our growth projections. We had to think about our employee projections. So I think a lot of things that happened during this period, I think during the whole lockdown, I think made us a lot more resilient in a way. I think we kind of really focused on what's important, really important, focused on the value proposition, really focused on our existing customers, on providing value in like tough times. So I would say it's been an interesting period where I feel like there was like just the spikes of optimism, and then I would say fear, and then kind of optimism again as we're kind of going now into the second lockdown, where we expect at least what's going to happen a bit more.
And you started to paint a good picture. I mean, if we look back between, let's say, March to September, or just before today, right? Like remote, definitely. Budgets very much shifting, if not disappearing. How have you guys navigated 2020, especially the like Q2, Q3, like March to September? For me at least, was a whole bunch of different decisions than I expected. And where would you say it hurt the most? Like what was the toughest, and where have you been pleasantly surprised in the past 6 months?
Yeah, for it was first kind of establishing the situation. So should we panic? Should we do any drastic changes? Is there opportunity that exists? And at the end, what we found is that we have money on our bank account. We need to hire the best people. Everybody else is letting people go. Let's focus on hiring. And we got talent which otherwise would never be available to us. And I think that's the biggest win for CleanShelf so far this year.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Alan, go ahead.
I think it's kind of a similar, kind of going back to the roots, I'd say, kind of filing the value propositions, which will work both in, high growth economy and then also in recession. I think the thing is with Pleo, it's like it's one of those products where it's a necessity, right? Like people need to spend money somehow. The companies that exist, right, they need to spend money. Like how will they spend it has changed. So we kind of had to adapt basically our value propositions a bit. We had to adapt to of course, the working culture, changing a bit more towards like categories, towards companies that were in high growth, that is e-commerce, that is delivery systems, that is marketplaces. We're trying to cater for the existing clients that were also kind of experiencing tough times, and then also kind of give an opportunity to new customers to use this time to basically digitalize their financial processes. So we came with a lot of examples where we tried to kind of focus a lot more on those value propositions, but we also kind of gave offers to customers that were struggling, trying to keep them afloat, trying to be supportive in the tough times. I think looking at it back now, I think the fear was there because of the uncertainty, but I said, I think we became a lot more resilient. We scaled quite a lot during the summer, and I think we had our best months now in the past few months, actually. And I think it was a lot of the results focusing on the really core value propositions, which will not change, right? Whether that is high growth or recession.
Yeah, I mean, those are two really good points. I mean, talent was definitely. It's a terrible thing to say, but there was more talent available because not every company was in a position where they just closed money, or they were financially stable, or they were selling a product that wasn't immediately impacted. I've been pleasantly surprised in that respect as well. I guess the question now is, we're far enough in that I think the initial reaction has started to wear off, right? It's no longer, remote isn't new, pandemic isn't new, impacted industries isn't new. There's a certain amount of what will be the effect of this lasting 6, 12, 18 years more, getting months more. But I guess the question is the future radically different? Is the future, is adoption accelerated? Are there new challenges that we're gonna pop up? Are there industries that are still pretty precarious and might not last another 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? What do you guys see now that you have this sort of 6 months of data?
Alan, will you go first?
Actually, we did a lot of research on looking into this data, right? Like understanding like the business spending behavior that is happening through the companies, right? So we've seen like declines on entertainment and travel, which was our #1 industry where people would do company expenses, decline dramatically. And then we would see an increase in SaaS services, which actually probably worked really well for Dusan and his team, right? So a lot of like digitalization, just expanding maybe into sectors that we're not really used to using those services before, right? And I think that's also like the cloud index is just following that trend, right? Like this digitalization just needed to be accelerated, right? Like people just needed to buy software really fast overnight to kind of keep them afloat. It's like one of the most popular merchants during this whole time has been LastPass and services that keep people connected, of course, like Zoom and stuff, but also services that keep people privacy safe, right? As people are working remote. And I think that's a lot of legacy companies that have experienced that, right? Like they were maybe not used to working with the cloud services as we were. That's also with the public sector that I've seen. So I think we've seen probably quite a lot of demand also from companies that were a bit more traditional and then kind of trying to shift. There's also been interesting stuff looking into what kind of services people buy during this time, even for their employees. How do perks change? How do people keep people engaged during this lockdown? So there's also interesting data on that. So kind of like, what can you expense when you're actually working from home? So kind of like entertainment for people that are actually working from home and stuff like that, right? So I would say that digitalization just happened overnight, a lot faster than we anticipated, and I think like the stocks rising for all the cloud companies is just like a result of that, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's a really great point. Like markets that were otherwise untouchable or high barrier to entry, like public sector or enterprise or public education, basically had to throw out the book on how they purchase software, which opens up great new opportunities for SaaS companies. Dushan, you want to build on that?
Yes, certainly. So for us, security further increased in importance. So with people being at home, the security implications, visibility implications have become much more important than before. And this is the area that we see the most kind of increased interest in our offering. So that's probably the biggest change. So in April, so March and April, CIOs were focused on enabling work from home. And starting in May, they start to think, okay, we created all this mess. How do we address all the challenges? How to manage all the things that are out there? So this is what we see changing in behavior of CIOs.
Yeah, it's funny because historically security, depending on what your target ICP was, really wasn't that big of an issue. You know, a mid-market company might be accessing your product from one IP at all, the office, and that's pretty much, that's it. That's their security. You know, maybe they're doing IP whitelisting, and that's already a level of complexity. Now, every company's accessing a product from multiple markets. Everyone's accessing it from changing IPs. Maybe they're tethering from their phone because they're off in a countryside, staying at their parents' place, and it doesn't seem like it can be an afterthought. Security. I mean, I've worked for 40 to 200 person companies that don't really SaaS companies that don't necessarily have security being at the forefront. I've also worked for companies for whom security was a bigger concern than it was for the customers, because that was the culture of the company. But it seems like now there might be a bit of a moat around. I don't necessarily want to switch because this product knows how to work for our scenario, right? We don't have to compromise security. That's really interesting. Well, I feel like as we look forward into 2021, I wonder how much of 2021 is going to look like 2020. Do we expect that digital adoption, that rollout's going to keep going? Do we expect that the talent availability is going to keep going? How much are you guys, I mean, it's Q4. I mean, assuming you guys run on the standard year, you guys are probably ramping up to think about 2021. So what are you guys expecting for your companies? What are you projecting, and what are you telling your board that they can expect going into 2021?
So we continue to expect that people will find it harder to part ways with their money. So that means a bit longer sales cycles, more scrutiny, more competitive research. So definitely people are still very nervous about market conditions. The focus will continue to be on digital transformation and kind of enabling flexibility in the business. So this is what we kind of anticipate for the next year.
Definitely, stinginess is gonna make things tough. Alan, how about you?
I'd say something similar, right? Like that I said before. I think companies are going to continue to exist and going to continue to spend money, and how they do it is going to change probably a bit, right? Like they're probably going to be a bit more strategic of what they're going to purchase. They're going to probably be a bit more, depending of course on the industry, right? They're going to think about, is this a nice to have thing or is this a necessity, like for us as a business? I think at the end of the day, we want to support companies to make the best decisions for their company. So we have to basically build features in mind to keep us more resilient during times that are not more maybe focused on. I think what we've learned during this time is like we've been quite focused on maybe like offline expenses because we were a card solution, and we also went a lot more into the cloud, as you can see, offering virtual services, offering our virtual cards, and offering perks to our company, to our customers by giving them discounts to different SaaS services, kind of nudging them into the direction of showing how we can accommodate different types of spending that what we were used to before. I think what happened is like we did a nice and healthy split also there, because we kind of got a lot more categories onto Pleo, onto the spending that we couldn't maybe didn't have before because travel was just going really crazy, the B2B travel space, right? So I think we hope that everything will compound in 2021. I hope for that business travel will come back, just because it's also something that people miss, that I see that people also want to do, also internally in our company during the summer, right? Like people miss to see each other and face to face. But in terms of talent, I think it also kind of made us a company that is a lot more flexible. We've been kind of remote open, but I think now we're like remote, not really remote first. We still have 6 offices, but we're like very flexible now. And the talent that we're bringing in the past few months has been literally from all the corners of the world, right? So we're less concerned about like the location now. So I think that's a benefit for us as well.
Yeah, I mean, you really raise some good points. I mean, just what you were saying there at the end. If I had to think about 2 things that for me stand out as being really obvious coming into 2021, one thing that we think a lot about is it seems really obvious that your narrative, when you go and talk to your prospects, when you talk to your ecosystem, we know we're going to address the elephant in the room. It's impossible. What conversation in or outside of work does not mention pandemic COVID-19? I mean, there's a bingo card and everyone's hitting it. I think the hard part then is that prior to COVID-19 and this situation, your strategic narrative could be vastly different from your competitors. It was really easy, and in fact they could both exist in parallel, and that was okay. And so you could have a compelling story and have that elevated you beyond product features. And everyone has now switched over to, here's why our product is good post-COVID. And so I think the hard part that we're going to see is the commoditization of that narrative very quickly. It's not going to be sufficient. I can't imagine any ICP that's going to be satisfied with, oh, good, this company is aware of COVID-19, and they say, and they've shown me the features that prove it's feature proof. I think the bar is going to be a lot higher, and the companies that are going to stand out aren't going to be just, we've seen the Zoom and the Microsoft Teams, and this tool is good for work from home. But I think the companies that are going to bring a narrative of how you go forward and not just sort of how you live with what's going on, I think that for me is going to be critical. And I'm constantly looking at companies. For example, I just saw one today, and I'll find the name in a bit, that's focused on asynchronous meeting management, right? Plenty of tools that help you manage meetings, Calendly to book your meeting, Zoom to record your meeting, lots of people hitting meeting fatigue. And so companies coming in and say, we're not a note-taking app, we're an asynchronous meeting management tool, right? They're bringing that narrative to how do you get beyond the current situation. So for me, that one's huge. And similar to what you said, Alan, about being more remote friendly, I think redefining the office is going to be a huge hurdle in 2021, and it's not really clear how it's going to impact people. We're a corporate university tool, and suddenly we have the responsibility to introducing new employees to their colleagues, because the first thing you do when you join a company is onboarding, And so suddenly you're the first impression in it. And suddenly people are thinking, oh, well, we'll just set up a meeting. Oh no, we don't want to have them doing 9 hours of meetings, for the first 14 days, just sitting in front of a computer. And so suddenly you have to redefine company culture, redefine the office, redefine employee perks. How are we going to keep and retain these talents if we can't give them, lunch in the office, cafeteria, a great desk, great rooftop, whatever. Well, suddenly the office is this desk that I've set up, the choice of my chair, my access to technology. And I think those two trends, just recognizing how you're going to tell that story to employees, really, and how you're going to tell that story to your target market, I think are going to be huge battlegrounds in 2021. Well, gang, we've got 5 minutes left. I do want to open the chat up to some questions. Gang, I gave you 6 minutes notice to start thinking about questions. So I want to hear your fears. What are you afraid of? I want to hear your doubts. I want to hear your questions. So chat room, don't let me down. Otherwise, I'm going to pick on Alex and make him come back and entertain us for a little bit. But while we're waiting for them to warm up, because I know I got caught off guard by Dan's question prompt earlier, I'll ask you guys this one last question, which is, take yourself back a few years, starting a company. What would you say to someone coming in to 2020 and they've got the itch, they see that things are changing, and they say, hey, Amazon got started in a crash, Facebook got started, got big during the crash, like now might be the opportunity. What do you think in the rule, how have the rules changed, or how have they stayed the same? And what do you say to new SaaS founders, or to the next generation of SaaS founders? Oh, Dushan, you're on mute. Oh, you're on mute still. You're on mute on our end. I don't know how this works. I think you're on mute on the browser.
Maybe I can go in the meanwhile.
Okay, Alan, I'll have you go first while Dushan figures out the mute.
Yeah, I think that's been kind of like the most common narrative right now, right? With a lot of VCs and like this business profile saying like every crisis brings us a lot of new opportunities. I think it's the same, right? Like there's a lot of, as you said earlier about this example of, rebundling video services or whatever, right? Like there's a lot of opportunities there. There's a lot of new categories popping up. There's a lot of new use cases, solutions, where there's online education just coming up, new categories that we didn't even know that existed that are going to probably stay permanent, right? But I think at the end is going to probably be like, I think during recession we kind of come to the core, like what do people really want in the beginning, right? Like not a lot will change, right? I think we during the recession we very much quicker come to the core of like fixing problems and kind of the main things that people want, right? And I think that's probably a good time during COVID, right? To kind of think about those things that are like really needed, right? There's not going to be a lot of fluff during this time coming up, right? I've seen a lot of fluffy startups as well during this time as well, but I think there's going to be a lot more.
Oh, there's fluff. Oh, it's still there.
So I think that's going to be probably a lot more of like companies that are a lot more like have no bullshit filter. So I'm quite excited for that during this time.
Dushan, take it away.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, crystal clear.
Excellent. Yeah. So in what I see is that the world become much smaller place over the past 9 months, which is really great if you are outside of Silicon Valley, because now being in the Silicon Valley is actually not so much an advantage anymore. And this gives tremendous opportunity to founders throughout the world. So we recently got a customer from Chile that was only a couple of months ago a 200-person company, but it grew 7x over the past 4 months. because they're in food delivery business. So there are some business which are absolutely exploding. It doesn't matter where they're started because everybody is in the same position. So the Zoom call looks exactly the same in Ljubljana, Copenhagen, or San Francisco. And starting the business now is on one end much harder because the competition is so much more. But on the other end, if you make it, you can make it extremely big.
Great point. Yeah, I think my big takeaway from Dan's 4 trends on SaaS, on the future of SaaS earlier, is that the moat is changing. The moat used to be a great product experience, or what I like to call math in the cloud, a nice little technical differentiator. It seems now that the moat is professional services on top of it, or transactional volume on top of it, or bundling IoT with a subscription, like Mirror or whatever the Peloton bike is. And it seems like, especially now, as things are really tough, figuring out how you're going to build a moat that's more than product experience, that's more than something that's commoditizable, I think is going to be where we're going to see people stand out, is really ingenious approaches to solving problems that combine SaaS. So we've got one last question, and then Matic, I promise I will turn it over. Our question comes from Kinga. She asks, do you think that SaaS companies should still communicate with messages like in these unprecedented times and offer COVID-related deals, or rather let it go? I've been working with several SaaS companies and their approaches are really varied. Isn't the audience tired of it? I would love to hear your thoughts. I'm happy to weigh in on this. Alan, I also know you're a marketing guru, so you want to take do you want to take this away?
Yeah, I think this I think people reach a saturation point. I think in the beginning, a lot of those offers and stuff like that were kind of like pinpointed and highlighted, but I think it just became, as everything with sales and marketing, it just becomes like a law of shitty click-throughs, right? Like it just kind of falls in the sea of other emails. So I think it's even better to avoid this and just take this as a new normal and try to basically understand what can you offer in this new normal, right? Like not create this kind of like scenario of like, oh, it's actually a horrible time, this is how we can help you. I think people know that already. So I think you just have to cut to the chase, right?
That's great. Dusan, you want to add to that? How are you guys handling this?
At the end of the day, it's all about empathy. So if you feel with the person on the other side of the Zoom, the words will come in the right way.
Yeah. On our end at 360 Learning, we did put out a COVID offer pretty early. It was mostly because we had hospitals reaching out who had to train first responder staff, and it was all volunteer staff. And we really just wanted a way to say, like, if you need a platform, like, it's free as long as you need it. And we just wanted to make it really clear, like, we don't need to sign a contract. We'll literally just give you access to a customer service rep and then get you onboarded. And so we put something out, and I mean, for 3 to 6 months, it was really good because we had a lot of people coming in and asking questions, and we were able to help the Paris Hospital Network in France and start a lot of good conversations. We kind of reflect what's going on. We don't see people asking for this and sort of bringing it up with us, because we don't talk about it. One of the things that we do talk about is we don't really talk about the pandemic or the COVID times. What we like to talk about is the Great Reset. You know, in the 1920s, it was the Great Recession, and in the 2020s, it's the Great Reset. We just like to set the stage and say, we don't need to say why the great, you know, in the 1920s, it was, you know, market crash, and we know what's going on here. But I think the key thing is just letting people know that you're aware that the stakes have changed, and that you are operating in that new paradigm, and that's the way, at least that's the way we've been approaching it. Well, guys, we're well over time, and I don't want to dig in and get us far behind. So Alan, Dusan, thank you guys for taking the time with us, especially with this time zone changes, and I know it's darker and later than we would like. And audience, thank you guys for sticking around and your great questions. Really appreciate that. And hello, Matic. Good to have you back with us.
Hello, guys. Hi, Alan. Thanks. Dusan, thanks,
guys,
for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.